Number 3, Celtics and Nuggets. Everybody watched the dunk contest. Tony Allen bouncing the ball to himself. Boston lost the game 107-86.
Hey, what's up? We've had around a week or two of the NBA offseason. We've already seen a few major changes that major teams have made. Some trades have been, for example, with John Wall and Russell Westbrook between Houston and Washington, and there have been other great free agent signings, which we will go into afterwards as well. So we will just dive right into it with the offseason of the Atlanta Hawks. Some major changes they made was that they acquired win-now veterans. They signed Chris Dunn, they signed Gallinari, they signed Rajon Rondo, and they also got Bogdan Bogdanovic as well. What this necessarily means for Atlanta is that they're most likely going to try and become a nuisance for all these bigger teams in the playoffs. They've acquired all these players that'll help them establish a winning culture, but also help by helping them long term. They have Trae Young, Kevin Huerter, Cam Reddish, John Collins, and they even drafted Onyeka Okongwu to fill in that void on the defensive end.
So on our website we posted an article about the Atlanta Hawks, and as you mentioned, they made a lot of moves signing a lot of veterans that can help them now as well as in the future. The thing I don't get really is why they signed exactly these players, because this basically renders players like Kevin Huerter, Reddish, and Hunter useless, because they'll have to come off the bench after a season where they started. Now they're going to have to come off the bench, and it kind of hinders their development. So do you think that's a good thing for Atlanta if they want to move forward?
I wouldn't necessarily. It's a really good thing, but I wouldn't say it's a bad thing either, because most of those players, except for John Collins, he can get an extension next season. Most of those players are still in their rookie contracts where they still have a few years, to grow, and we'll see what those players turn into. But during that period, if Atlanta does greater than expected over the next few years, let's say Trae Young goes into the MVP conversation, leading the Hawks to a top 3 seed in 3 years. And they're gonna, for example, let's say they need another All-Star, and if they have those young players, they can maybe trade them for an All-Star to go to that win-now mode, which Atlanta will desperately need.
That's true. I also think their roster is definitely full of players who can get minutes. If you look at their point guard spot, their third-string point guard is Chris Dunn, who I think is a really good defensive player, but just because they have Rajon Rondo, I don't really think Chris Dunn is going to get much playing time, which is sad, because I loved how he played in Chicago. As well as they have Onyeka Okongwu, and since they still have John Collins and Capella, he's going to have to come off the bench. So I think all these young players, they're going to have to take a smaller role just because Atlanta wants to get into playoffs. Obviously, it ain't that bad because playoff experience is nice, but if I was Atlanta, I'd maybe give at least one of their young players a starting spot, so having either Bogdan or both Bogdan and Danilo on the bench at some point.
Yeah, I think it all depends on what Atlanta is necessarily trying to do. I think we can just wait till the season starts and we'll see how they do. If they end up becoming a little bit more disappointing than people expect, then they'll probably say, yeah, we'll let the young guys start a bit. But if they end up doing really well, or at least what people expected them to, I don't see why they shouldn't start Bogdanovic instead of putting him on the bench.
Alright, but I definitely think Atlanta has a good potential to get into playoffs. I think their team's pretty stacked, and I'm really excited to watch them play next year.
Yeah, same here. Alright, so the next up we have the Boston Celtics here. They didn't make a lot of moves, but they made moves that slightly benefited their roster compared to last season. One of their biggest problems last year was rebounding with the centers. They had Daniel Tice, and they had a mix between Rob Williams as well, starting at times. The rebounding when I was watching Boston was a huge issue. So what they did to fix that was that they signed Tristan Thompson from Cleveland, who is a monster at getting offensive rebounds. So that'll definitely help Boston in that turn. He'll probably average somewhere between 10 to 12 rebounds, I guess. But what they also needed was a little bit more depth on the bench with their guard rotation. So not only did they sign Jeff Teague, who is a renowned veteran, they also drafted really well, in my opinion. They drafted Nesmith with the 14th pick, Aaron Nesmith, who averaged a little bit over 50% from 3 in college, which will help their spacing a lot. And they also drafted Peyton Pritchard at 26th, who I think will be a great rotational piece if Brad Stevens uses him well and he gets coached well. Although there has been a lot of, comments about this draft, whether it not being it not being a strong one because the start potential isn't there. However, I could come up with the argument that this will be a really, really nice draft for established role players who will stay here for years to come and help their team win games. For example, with Aaron Nesmith, I can see him do that, although as he averaged, as I said, around 50% from 3, NBA teams are going to want to desire that. So he's going to probably want to stay here for, as long as he can, shoot the 3 ball insanely well. So moves Boston made, I think they will definitely be on the top 3 team along with Milwaukee and Brooklyn.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest thing for Boston, obviously, this offseason was losing Gordon Hayward. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think that just opens more opportunities for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to flourish even more. As we've seen the year after Kyrie left, they had a big bump in usage. So I'm hoping that this Gordon Hayward thing with him leaving kind of makes Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown blossom into, even better players. As you said with rebounding, I think last year what we tried to do to fix it was to get Enes Kanter. But obviously his problem is defending, and you could obviously see that Brad Stevens couldn't really play him just because he couldn't defend anybody. And I think Tristan Thompson is an improvement in that end because he can at least be formidable on defense, and he's a good pick-and-roll player, so I think he's a much better fit than Enes Kanter. And I'm really happy for Kanter going back to Portland because he fit well in there. But yeah, now we have a solid center rotation with Daniel Tice, Robert Williams, and Tristan Thompson. And what I'm looking at now is who will start the season at point guard. That's the big question because we know Kemba Walker is going to be out for, the first couple weeks. So is it Marcus Smart at point guard? If so, who plays shooting guard? If it's Jaylen Brown and then there's Jason Tatum, who's at power forward? So there's obviously that one player who we don't know who's going to be in the starting lineup. I think to start the season off, I think Daniel Tice will still be the starting center, but it could change later on regarding on either matchups or, who blossoms better.
Yep, agreed. So next up, we have the Brooklyn Nets. I have them coming out of the East. I'm going to say it right now. Although we have seen a very small sample size of Kyrie, he barely played 20 games. He played around 20 games last season, struggled with injuries, along with Kevin Durant, who was injured throughout the entire season after his run with Golden State. They didn't do much in the offseason. They acquired Landry Shamet, who I think is a solid shooting player. They switched him up with... along with the Brooklyn Nets, we have seen last season there was a small sample size with Kyrie. He played more or less around 20 games, and he struggled with injuries all season, along with Kevin Durant, who was out for the entire season. I have them coming out of the East, although we haven't seen them playing together. Their goals far supersede that in the fact that Kevin Durant wants to prove that he can lead a team all the way to a championship, and Kyrie just wants to win a championship as well, proving that, he may or may not be the teammate he is portrayed by the media. There are all these comments with flat earth and etc., which is a little bit crazy in my opinion, but as long as if you can hoop and you can produce, you'll be respected enough in the league as well. But however, they have had a lot of players leaving. They have, for example, Justin Anderson and John Amusa, who haven't done much, but they're going to leave. However, they have acquired by trade Bruce Brown and Landry Shamet, and Landry Shamet can shoot pretty nicely, and he is a little bit more established compared to the players that were leaving. But they didn't do much out of S through F. I'd probably give them a C tier just because it didn't make a lot of changes. However, they have Kevin Durant and Kyrie, which is enough offensive firepower, along with solid role players with Joe Harris, Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, and Spencer Dinwiddie.
Yeah, I think this is one of the deepest teams in the league. I also have stated in the previous podcast that I think they're going to come out of the East, just because they're so deep. Every position, the first two players could be like starting players on different teams. So you have Kyrie and Spencer, you have Joe Harris, Karis LeVert, Landry Shamet, and even Bruce Brown. On small forward, you have Taurean Prince and Jeff Green, and Timothy Luwawu, who played great in the bubble. On power forward, you have Durant, Kurucs, and at center, you have Jared Allen and DeAndre Jordan. That is a stacked lineup. And I think if they do pull the trigger for a Harden trade, I think they're very well equipped because they have a lot of players they can put in that trade. And that would make that team even more deadly. Deadly with ISOs, that is. But yeah, this team is pretty stacked. I don't think they really needed to do much this offseason. They re-signed Joe Harris, which was, I think, their main priority, as well as getting Landry Shamet. I think that's a pretty good plus because they need some more shooting on that team. So yeah, I really like the Brooklyn Nets. And you also should mention that they have Steve Nash. So I think, this is going to be a big challenge for him. He's going to be looked at by a lot of people in the media, seeing how he does, and I really wish the best for him.
Yeah, personally, I think Steve Nash will do an excellent job because he has that NBA experience. He's a two-time MVP. And wasn't also Amari Stoudemire going to be the assistant coach?
I think he is. Maybe. I think maybe. I've heard something, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, I personally think Steve Nash will do a good job knowing how he can connect well with NBA players and such. Alright, next up we have the Charlotte Hornets. I'm very confused with what the actual hell they did during the offseason. Charlotte knows they're not going to win a lot. However, I like the pick they made with LaMelo. He was out of the last top three. He was according to the draft itself, the third best player to choose. However, I think it's based on need and fit that they need LaMelo Ball. He's a little bit more playmaking. And with Minnesota, they had D'Angelo Russell. And Golden State, they need a little bit more of an established center, so they chose James Wiseman. And I will not fault Charlotte for choosing Melo. I think he's more of like a player that will gather them revenue. He's a flashy player. He can shoot. He's a lot what the new NBA is all about. That's the positive side of what they did. The negative side, in my opinion, is the Gordon Hayward sign and trade they did. I think it was $140 million for 4 years. Was it that?
120, but yeah, that's insane amount of money.
120 for 4 years for a guy who was plagued by injuries last season and somebody who won't necessarily elevate them to even make the playoffs. So how I see this is this Michael Jordan just hindering the youth of Charlotte, because a guy I really rate on that team is PJ Washington, and now he'll have somewhat of a diminished role coming into next season.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about Gordon. One thing I could add for Boston, at least, when they did the sign and trade, they got a $29 million trade exception. So that kind of opens up possibilities for them to maybe sign another player. Well, not sign, but trade for another player that has a huge contract. Meaning that I don't think this is the final team we're going to see. They're probably going to get another good player for that squad so they can be even more deadly. But yeah, about Charlotte, as you said, LaMelo Ball, I think that was an obvious choice to pick. In training camp, he's shown some flashes of good passing vision, and from what I've seen, he's a really, really nice player, and I think he'll fit in Charlotte pretty nicely. Box office revenue, as you said. But then you have a question of, is he going to start? Is he going to come off the bench? Because you obviously have Devontae Graham and you have Terry Rozier, as well as Malik Monk also as a shooting guard coming off the bench. So what do you do with him? Do you make him come off the bench, or what's the plan here?
If I were the Charlotte Hornets, I would 100% start LaMelo, and I'd maybe do. I really like Devontae Graham. However, coming off the bench for Devontae wouldn't be necessarily a big issue. He'll still get a lot of minutes. However, Terry Rozier can also come off the bench if that problem pains him as well. But Terry Rozier is more of a scoring guard than Devontae. Devontae can play make as well, but Terry Rozier is more that scoring two guard. I think Terry Rozier would do better at the two guard, along with LaMelo, compared to Grant Devontae at the two guard. But I wouldn't be mad if they started Devontae either, because you've seen what Devontae can do. However, I think LaMelo is going to have to take the reins for the Charlotte offense next season.
I think what they should do is trade Terry Rozier. I think he's the odd man out right now. But, with the contract he has, I don't really know what Charlotte could get back for him. Because I think, obviously, to make LaMelo play even better, I think he has to start. And I think Terry Rozier is just that player in the way. And he's getting also quite older. And I think if you had to choose between keeping Devontae and Terry, I'd much rather keep Devontae. Because he's also on the cheap contract. The Gordon Hayward thing, it kind of hinders Miles Bridges' development, because now Gordon's going to start at small forward most likely. But I guess the one bright side you could look at is if you're a fantasy owner and you have Gordon Hayward in your squad, he can ball out, because there's literally nobody else who can take shots. And I think Gordon Hayward is almost one of the only players who can create shots for himself. So I think he's going to have a fun time in Charlotte. But overall, I think this is going to be just another year of rebuilding for Charlotte. I don't know what the whole plan is with Gordon Hayward overall, other than to maybe just teach the young guys. But looking at their big man depth, they only have PJ Washington and then they have Cody Zeller. I think they just have a lot more work to do with this roster, and yeah, I don't really see them doing much this year.
Me neither. So next up, we have the Chicago Bulls. A move they did that was a little bit surprising in Bulls fashion is that they drafted Patrick Williams with the 4th pick. Now, the thing is, Patrick Williams was projected to go 8th. A player, for example, like Obi Toppin, Denny Avdia, Isaac Okoro, Tyrese Halliburton, those were the players that were protected to be in that position. However, some benefits you get with Patrick Williams is that he was a ACC 6-man of the year, I think, in college. Although it's not proven that much, his upside must be tremendous for Chicago to draft him. They signed a few cheap free agents. They signed Devin Dotson, they signed Zach Norvell Jr., and they got Garrett Temple and Noah Vonleh. I think those moves are okay because Chicago, they don't use a lot of cap to get those players, and it's more like somewhat roster fillers because Chicago, they're not going to go all in. They know that, and if they're going to try and win, they're going to have cap to either sign for a huge free agent or they better have decent assets to trade. But a huge improvement that I like is that they finally fired Jim Boylan to replace him with Billy Donovan. So I see we could potentially have a very decently improved Chicago team next season. Because, as the whole league knows, Chicago was a huge problem with Jim Boylan. But I've been having a lot of questions about Kobe White. How do you see Kobe White coming into next season?
I think he should start at point guard, honestly. I think he was a really good player for them. Maybe the shooting percentages weren't really there, but some games he just caught fire and he was just unstoppable. So I think right now they have Thomas Satoransky at point guard, but I think Kobe White could fit that spot pretty well. And then you have Kobe, Zach, Otto Porter, Laurie, and Wendell. And if you look at that lineup, I think that's a pretty solid lineup, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great lineup. I agree. I 100% agree they should start Kobe White. I remember last season he had a solid string of 30-point games, shooting lights out from deep. But what impressed me a lot about him is his driving power. He can drive really nicely to the rim. Not dunking it, but he can finish it kind of decently, at least in that stretch with those 30-point games. So I say they should just keep shooting, keep trying to generate as much offense as they can with Levine, Otto Porter, and Kobe White, and Markkanen. I really hope Lauri Markkanen finally turns up next season. Last year was a little bit of a down year with Jim Boylan. There was problems with him and Boylan as well. And I remember rookie Lauri Markkanen, he was doing really well. I remember he postered Enes Kanter when Kanter was on the Knicks as well. But I think next season will be somewhat of a make or break for Markkanen. just because we haven't seen him do much last season. However, I believe he can turn it around next season.
Again, talking about the roster, looking at it again, I don't really see, like, they have good young players at every position. And at what time do you decide to, I guess, blow it up or, go a different route? Because Zach LaVine is kind of nearing his prime, and he hasn't really done much in his career with the Chicago Bulls. What do you think?
Do you know how many years he has left on his contract?
I think it could be maybe 2 years.
Yeah, he has 2 years left on Chicago, and he's kind of he wants to win a lot. So I think if I don't think Chicago will do anything, and I think that will lead to either LaVine getting traded for younger assets and picks, or maybe LaVine will walk in free agency. But where LaVine could go, I have no idea.
Because if they don't find any success with the team they have, like, they have a lot of good young players, I think they should at least get something for LaVine instead of letting him go. Because right now he's 25, yeah, almost nearing 26, and that's like, for a player who uses a lot of athleticism, that's kind of like those prime years. So I think they should decide what they want to do with him. Do they want to make him like the franchise player? Even though I do not see him as a first option on a championship caliber team. He's more like a second or third option. But yeah, I think they should start to think about what the future is for Zach LaVine.
Yeah, definitely. Next team, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. They didn't do necessarily a lot in free agency. They drafted Isaac Okoro with the 5th pick. He is a great defender. Offensively, there's a little bit of holes, but I think he'll develop that as well. They also acquired by trade JaVale McGee from the Los Angeles Lakers. I think he'll take the backup minutes behind Drummond next season. But other than that, there isn't much they did. They signed Thon Maker, and they also signed Damian Dotson from the Knicks. There isn't much for me to say about that.
I actually didn't realize that Thon Maker is in Cleveland. I was thinking, like, is there going to be any team that signs Thon Maker? Did you know before that Thon Maker was in Cleveland? I didn't.
I didn't either. I found out about it yesterday, so I was like, damn, he actually signed with Cleveland. Because when he came in to Milwaukee, when he was drafted, he had huge upside. I guess it just hasn't panned out.
What I see from them is obviously they're going to have Colin and Darius in their backcourt. I don't really think Darius was it last year. I think he still has some growing to do. But yeah, they have Seti and Isaac Okoro as the small forwards. Power forwards, they have Kevin Love and Larry Nance. And at centers, they have, as you said, Drummond and McGee, most likely. I think what they should do next year is maybe try to find a trade partner for Kevin Love or Andre Drummond, or even both, because they're kind of in their primes, or a little bit past their primes, and they could be some valuable players for teams that are trying to make a push for that playoff run. The thing with their the only problem is their contracts. Their contracts are huge, and many people around the league kind of see Kevin Love and Andre Drummond as negative assets. So you would have to give a pick or two just to get rid of them, and I don't think Cleveland will want to do that. I think they'll most likely just want to keep them to help with the young guys. But I can see Andre Drummond being a potential buyout candidate for some teams to pick up during whenever the buyout market is going to happen this year. I don't even know the dates this year because it's been so hectic. But yeah, that's what I see from Cleveland.
Yeah. Next up, we have the Dallas Mavericks. With Dallas, I have them somewhat of becoming the We Believe Warriors for next year. I believe next season they have high potential to shock the entire league next season. Because what I saw from Luka last season was absolutely absurd. Dropping 40-point triple-double on an injured ankle with a game winner on the Clippers team, who I don't even want to go into right now. But enough about that. About the offseason, they signed James Johnson from OKC with a huge contract. I think he has 1 year left, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a big risk there. They'll probably use him for the year or trade him. And they also signed a really underrated player, Josh Richardson.
Traded.
They acquired by my bad. They acquired Josh Richardson by trade, where they traded away Seth Curry. Josh Richardson, I remember when he was in Miami, he could dunk on people, high flying, and he was also used as a secondary ball handler at times. In Philly, that role completely changed. He was surrounded by a lot of clutterness when Al Horford, Simmons, and Embiid were in the lineup together. And his release was a little bit slow, so he was at times hesitant with Philly. And that led to him having a little bit below average season for his standards. So I think Richardson knew himself that he needed a change of scenery. With Richardson now playing in the lineup with Kleber, Porzingis, and Luka, I can definitely see him having a lot more improved season compared to when he was with Philly.
Yeah, I liked that Josh Richardson for Dallas. I think it was a win-win trade for both teams. Philly needed shooting, obviously, and Dallas, they have another player who can technically create his own shot, and he's a great defender. I remember when Kemba had to rank defenders who he doesn't really want to play against. I think he had Josh Richardson at the top of his list because he said it's really hard to dribble when he's so pesty, right up in your guts. So I think that he's going to be a good addition for that team. He can either play the shooting guard, small forward. I think it'll most likely be, what I would say is Luke at point guard. Then they have Tim Hardaway at shooting guard, Josh Richardson small forward, Dorian Finney-Smith power forward, and Porzingis at center. But they do have 4 centers who are all capable of getting minutes. Willie Cauley-Stein, Kleber, Marjanovic, and Powell. Like, their center lineup is absolutely insane. Any of these players could get minutes, and they're very well deserving of minutes. So, I wouldn't necessarily say that their roster is deep, but it's very center deep. Looking at point guards, they obviously retained Trey Burke, who was great at the bubble. What else? They drafted Josh Green, who was a nice guy out of Australia. A small signing with Wes Iwundu, who can play a backup small forward role. But other than that, they're really, really, really deep in centers. So what do you think? Should they trade a center, or should they keep it as is? Because it's very versatile and they can adjust to whatever you can get.
I say let the season run a little bit, see who may be the odd man out, and maybe they'll probably trade him afterwards. With what I've been looking at, they could use maybe a backup shooting guard or a backup power forward who will help stretch the floor. Because when we've talked about the backup centers, other than Porzingis, they don't have anybody who can necessarily shoot threes.
Kleber.
I meant Kleber and Porzingis.
Powell.
I was gonna mention Kleber as well, but wait, Powell can shoot threes?
Yes, but he's more of a power forward, but I guess you could technically pay him as a center.
Damn. Okay. Well, I did not know that, but I thought Powell was more like a rim running center, kind of like that.
Well, turns out he can shoot as well.
Do you know what his percentages are?
I think it was actually pretty good from 3. I do not know the percentages, but I'll check it out when you talk. So go ahead.
At least with Powell, I haven't watched much of him. However, I didn't expect him to become somewhat of an average three-point threat. But I think if, let's say, Powell struggles, Marjanovic struggles, I don't think Marjanovic will get as much minutes. But if he struggles a bit, I could see maybe him getting traded for a backup wing player. But other than that, I say they keep it as it is, let it run, and see how it goes from there.
For his career, he is a 29% three-point shooter, so not technically a good three-point shooter. He's kind of mediocre.
How was he last season?
Last season he was 26%, 0.3 makes on 1 attempt per game. His best season was in 2018 with the Mavericks, where he averaged 33%, making 0.5% of his threes per game. So yeah, we have that. I think it's a really good team. But I think what they should look for in the future is just another player who can create his own shot. I think Josh Richardson is a little bit like that, but I think you should look for a star player in the future if I was Dallas.
Do I hear Zach LaVine free agency in 2 years?
That could technically be an option. I think Dallas should go for it because Luka's on his rookie deal, and while he's still on his rookie deal, I think you should use this opportunity before you supermax him and you can't get anybody in free agency.
Yep, definitely. Next up, we have the Denver Nuggets. They didn't do much during the offseason. They signed R.J. Hampton, who played in Australia last season, with the 24th pick. He is a little bit of a shot-creating kind of guard. He can give you a little bit of energy off the bench if you need it. Next, they didn't do much with free agency. They signed Campazzo, who played in the Europe last season. He's from Argentina. I watched him a little bit, and he looks like a great point guard who is well suited for a team like Denver, or for example, a team like the Spurs, who are team oriented.
I heard he's one of the best pick and roll players in Europe.
He was great in Europe. They also signed, who I think is a great underrated signing, is JaMychal Green. When he played in Memphis 2 years ago, he was great for Memphis as a role player. Could hit a few threes, could rebound as well. And when he was in the Clippers, he had the same role. Good stats and great statistics for what you need from him. He can, as I said, he can shoot the ball a little bit, rebound, do the occasional pick and roll with the handoff. And I think JaMychal Green will give you solid enough minutes and solid enough production compared to what they had with Grant last season.
Yeah, talking about what Denver did in the offseason, they basically watched Jeremy Grant walk to Detroit. That's what they did. That was a really tough pill to swallow, I think, for Denver, seeing how well he played in the bubble last year. But what I see from their lineup right now, by the looks of it, Bol will be their backup center / power forward next year. Because they also lost Mason Plumlee to Detroit. So they only have Bol and Isaiah Hartenstein as centers right now. And for power forward, you have JaMychal Green, who can obviously play center. But other than that, I think Bol is going to have a lot of time playing minutes for Denver next year. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, with Denver, how do you see them coming into the playoffs next season, knowing with the growth you saw from Michael Porter Jr.?
Going into the playoffs next year?
Yeah.
I think they're going to be a high-speed team. I think even Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, they're so young. They have so much room to grow. And maybe I think they should still hunt for a move maybe when the season begins or near the trade deadline. I think Gary Harris isn't really it for them right now. So either move him to the bench and let Michael Porter start, or do something that makes Michael Porter get to the starting lineup, because as it looks right now, they still have Gary Harris and Will Barton, meaning it's either Michael Porter on the bench or Paul Millsap on the bench as a power forward. So I think they need to clean that up, understand what they want to do. But obviously Denver's still going to be a top 3 team in the Western Conference, and for how young they are, it's completely insane, and they still have so much room to grow.
Yeah, it can only go upwards from here with Denver at least.
And what you said about what we talked about with the drafting, like they can take risks with drafting, and for what we've seen right now with Michael Porter and Bol, like these risks have panned out, and it's worked great for them, being a team that's so high up in the leaderboards, but still having to draft high risk, high reward players, or basically low risk, high reward players. And this year as well with Zeke Naji, who I think is a center, as well as RJ Hampton, who is a really explosive point guard. If any of them pans out, it just continues to add to the young and depth of Denver.
Yeah. Next up, we have the Detroit Pistons. Their off season, I have no idea what. Personally, I do not know why they did what they did. As I know with Jeremy Grant, he said during the off season he wanted to have a bigger role next season. He wanted the ball more, and who else but Detroit to give him that money, but also take Plumlee with them as well. Detroit, they're not going to do much. They hinted somewhat last year that they're going to go hard rebuild when they traded Drummond for John Henson and a few picks. However, I think they still have Derrick Rose, who I think they should trade to a contender. They have Blake Griffin, who I think they should trade to a contender as well. However, he has been struggling with injury issues last season.
As well as his contract is absolutely massive.
Huge contract. But, however, they acquired a few okay players. They got Delon Wright, who I like a lot. He didn't do that much in Dallas, but when he was with Memphis, he was really good. They also got a few unproven players, the Janan Musa and Rodney Magruder. A few players who can somewhat spot up as well. But with what they did in the draft, I really like Killian Hayes. He's a point guard. He looks like he has a lot of confidence on the get-go. So I think that was a solid choice. But what do you think they're going to do with, for example, the other free agents they signed? Most notably, high lottery picks who haven't panned out, such as Josh Jackson and Jahlil Okafor.
I think they're just there to, give you some backup minutes. I don't necessarily think they will provide that much for Detroit. I think it's just like, well, we have a little bit of cap room. Might as well use it on young players instead of old players. So they're basically giving them a chance. If they do pan out, great. You can trade them for some picks maybe. But other than that, when we talk about Detroit, when they had the draft, I thought they were the clear draft winners because of all the trades they made. They got Killian Hayes, Isaiah Stewart, a center with the 16th pick. They also got Saddiq Bey, who's a great 3-and-D player. And they got rid of Luke Kennard, freeing up the space for a new shooting guard. But then free agency started, and then they made all these moves. And I think what Detroit was trying to do is make as many moves possible, not necessarily thinking if they make sense or not. Because what they did is just clog up all positions for no reason at all. Right now they have point guard. DeLon Wright is a nice player. He can play shooting guard as well. But right now they have Derrick Rose, DeLon Wright, and Killian Hayes. And if you want to, let Killian Hayes be the primary ball handler and start, you would obviously need to remove Derrick Rose, who's still on the team. Shooting guard, they have Smi Mikhailuk. They have some veterans like Wayne Ellington and Rodney Magruder. Small forward is the only spot where they don't necessarily have a starter, unless you include Jeremy Grant as a small forward. Would you include Jeremy Grant as a small forward?
Somewhat.
Small forward, power forward?
Some small forward, power forward, more on the power forward side.
Then they have Blake and Sekou at power forward. So they obviously need to get rid of Blake for Sekou to make another leap. And then you have a center position of Mason Plumlee, Isaiah Stewart, and Jahlil Okafor. Like, Detroit, what are you doing? You literally signed Mason Plumlee for the same price that you traded Christian Wood away to Houston. Why not keep Christian Wood? Young player, he played out of his mind last season when you traded Drummond. Nope. Let's get Mason Plumlee instead. That's what I have to say about Detroit.
Yeah,
it just doesn't make sense.
I really liked Christian Wood last season. He was somewhat of the only bright spot they had, and I think he'll do well in Houston. And I think Houston, which we'll come up to later, is gonna have a really underrated team next season. Golden State, they got Kelly Oubre from Phoenix through OKC. I think Phoenix did him dirty by having him model the new Valley jerseys, which are really nice, by the way. But then they got rid of him like immediately afterwards. Kelly Oubre, although he does not fit the void of Klay Thompson, Kelly Oubre can do a really decent job. But he can do a decent enough job at the starting role. He averaged around 20 points with Phoenix. He is a high energy player. He can dunk on people, he can shoot, and he can do shot creating as well. So that is great, but what they also did was they drafted James Wiseman with the second pick to fill in the void at center they needed. They also got Nico Mannion, who is a high school legend. He got 48th after somewhat of a little bit of a disappointing college season. With their roster, the people who are leaving, as I see here, it's Dragan Bender and Kai Bowman. Thought Kai Bowman was somewhat of a decent player last season, but you could tell he's not going to stay there long term because although he got decent minutes, they were not winning, and I don't think he was going to be a part of that team once Steph Curry came back. But I think Golden State will definitely they'll definitely be in the playoffs knowing that Steph Curry is back, and Draymond plays really well when Steph Curry is on the floor. Everybody plays well when Steph Curry is on the floor. So I think with the energy Steph Curry will bring, with the transition game they can bring in with James Wiseman and Kelly Oubre and all these other players they have, I think they'll do really well next season.
Yeah, I think their starting lineup looks kind of decent even without Klay Thompson. But saying that they will be in the playoffs for sure, I think that's still questionable, just because we haven't seen how that team plays out. Andrew Wiggins obviously isn't a shooter. Kelly Oubre, kind of a shooter, but Andrew Wiggins not really. He doesn't really fit the mold of the Golden State Warriors basketball. So it's a little bit of a different scheme that Steve Kerr has to implement, as well as James Wiseman. When was the last time we saw a good center for Golden State if you exclude DeMarcus Cousins, who was rendered with injuries?
Last good center they had, off the top of my head, I can't remember really.
Maybe Bogut, when he was still younger.
Bogut was fine, but he was more of a role player. He was a player who did his role good enough. Is that the center you were talking about, or were you talking about a guy who was averaging good above average numbers?
Like, I don't know. This is a genuine question because I don't know when the last time was when Golden State had a good center.
Yeah, me neither.
Probably Will Chamberlain was the last one.
Off the top of our head, I guess Will Chamberlain. But Bogut, I like Bogut. He did his role nicely. He did what he had to do to make Steph and Clay flourish. So if that's the case, yeah, sure, it's Andrew Bogut. But if you're talking about somebody who can change the game through offense or doing all these different plays, I don't think Bogut's that necessarily.
Yeah, but James Wiseman, though, like, he's a player who can be like your, I guess you could say, like a franchise cornerstone. This is the kind of player who can shoot, who can defend, rim run, high motor. He can do a lot of things, and he's a really intelligent player. I think he knows Mandarin as well. So I really hope he pans out for Golden State, and I think what we're going to see from Golden State next year is a little bit of a different team because they're structured a little bit differently, and I think they have a pretty solid depth as well. They signed Brad Wanamaker off of Boston. They still have Damian Lee, who played decently last year. They got Kent Bazemore back, Eric Pascal, who played great last year as a rookie, and they have Kawhi Looney as a backup center. So this team looks pretty solid. Will they get in the playoffs? I think it's a 50-50 knowing how deep the West is. But yeah, I think this is also going to be a fun team to watch because, if everybody's healthy, that is.
Houston, they made quite a bit of moves this offseason when they traded Russell Westbrook for John Wall and a pick. I can see how this team makes sense for both sides. However, I'm a little bit confused on Washington's side. With John Wall, I think he'll benefit Houston more compared to what Russell Westbrook did with James Harden. However, James Harden has expressed that he wants to leave. I think this will be good for John Wall. He'll be playing in a situation where he doesn't have as much pressure, knowing that he'll be playing with James Harden. If he does not get moved, he'll play with Christian Wood, who had a great season, and DeMarcus Cousins, who John Wall is great friends with, and he played with him in Kentucky when they were in college. So I personally think if healthy, Houston will cause a lot of damage and be a sneaky playoff contender. That's if John Wall and if DeMarcus Cousins play to their full strengths here. How do you see Houston becoming a seed or playoff contention next season?
I actually, it really just depends on James Harden. But from what I've seen currently, from what has happened, I don't really think they're going to be a playoff team. I think James Harden is going to get moved most likely. And I think the first indicator of that was when they traded away Robert Covington, just like half a season after they acquired him, and they get a pick out of that. So they obviously has to mean they're going in rebuilding mode. Then they got another pick for Russell Westbrook getting John Wall. But then you get decent centers in Christian Wood and DeMarcus Cousins, who could potentially mean that they still want to go for a playoff run. But with the stuff that has happened with Harden, with him going to all of these clubs and not doing his quarantining, and now he's only doing testing, I feel bad for Steven Silas, who's like the new coach for Houston. I think this is a really bad look on him just because of what Harden has done. But yeah, if Harden does stay, I could see this team being on the level of Golden State, being a team that kind of gets in the playoffs, but is going to hover around that 7-8 seed. Or at least now, we can't even say because they're going to have the play-in tournament with the 9th and 10th seed. So literally anybody could get in the playoffs right now.
Yeah.
But for Houston, they did go for a little more traditional lineup with having two centers in Wood and Cousins, moving PJ Tucker to the power forward spot. But this team there's still a lot of unknowns with this team, just by the way Harden has been acting.
Yeah. However, I think Houston could potentially make the playoffs due to the play-in setting that will happen for the next season. If they're a 10th seed, it could happen that they may make the playoffs and upset the other teams that are ahead of them. If they make the 10th seed,
Well,
do you think if they make the play-in, do you think they have a chance to knock off some of the teams?
Sure. If you have James Harden, I think you can win any game just because of the sheer firepower he has by himself. But one thing I know for sure is that their team is gonna like the offense is gonna look much more different now having two standard centers and not having to shoot just threes under Mike D'Antoni. I think we'll see a lot more mid-range game just because John Wall can hit mid-ranges, and I think all the good superstars have a mid-range game, and I think Harden has it as well, but he hasn't been able to show it just because of D'Antoni's system.
Yeah, I know in OKC, when he was the sixth man, he shot mid-ranges a little bit, at least. But now that the game has changed, I can understand why he doesn't shoot as many threes as he used to. Alright, the Pacers, they didn't do as much in the offseason. They drafted Cassius Stanley. They got Jalen Lacroix from OKC last season. I know he has a lot of bounce. He can jump off the gym. Other than that, they haven't made any significant moves at all. There isn't really much to talk about, though. Victor Oladipo, he was a little bit sluggish when he came back after his injury. There was a lot of trade discussions with Miles Turner, so we don't know how his role will be next season. And Domantas Sabonis wasn't played solid last season as he was an all-star. Other than that, along with Malcolm Brogdon, who was really good, and Aaron Holiday, who has a lot of potential, I don't think there is much to talk about here with Indiana, other than also TJ Warren turned into Michael Jordan 2.0 in the bubble last season. That's the only thing I have to talk about Indiana.
Yeah, and then he got locked up by Miami and turned back to himself. But yeah, like their starting lineup, it looks pretty nice. But I think Miles Turner is the odd man out. I think Domantas has to play at center. I think they could get a different power forward. But I think Indiana is just that team that it's kind of in the middle. They don't really have a star player. They have a lot of really good players, but they don't have a star player. And as we saw, of course, they didn't have Domantas in the bubble. Was that right?
No, they didn't have him.
Yeah, I think you could say that was a big reason to why they got swept. But I also think that, they should get a different player for maybe Victor Oladipo, or I guess hope that he has a better season, a better bounce back season, because as this team is constructed right now, I see them being as a 4-5 seed, but I don't really see them going far, just because they don't really have that one star player that can, take a game-winning shot. They have many good players, and any one of these players could take the shot. But I just want Indiana to have a one good player. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. Like the guy who has, true staying power, I suppose. Like somebody to actually put them over the top.
Yeah, because right now, as the team's constructed, I don't think they have that right now.
Nah, I gotta agree with that. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Clippers. I will never I still to this day laugh at the Clippers, even now when we saw all the beef with Paul George and Doc Rivers about he did this, he didn't let me do that. I hope Paul George bounces back, because when he was in Indiana, he was one of my favorite players to watch. I first heard about him when he literally threw down one of the best posters I've seen in the playoffs on Chris Anderson with the Miami LeBron team.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I remember that. And this was the resurgence of Paul George. Ever since then, along with the injury he did in the USA game, which I wish I didn't mention, he hasn't necessarily been the same. Although he was an MVP candidate in OKC during that 1 year, he's been very inconsistent ever since then with the Clippers. The names way off P, backseat P, Paul George hitting the side of the backboard, which I thoroughly enjoyed watching, because the Clippers team, they were, I guess you can say before the bubble, they were saying, yeah, this is our time, and they didn't necessarily practice much. Lou Williams with all the chicken, he went to the strip club, had wings, Patrick Beverley saying this is our next 5 years and all that stuff. And with that in mind, with how they acted, I guess they're just as confident that they'll have this almost the run it back mentality next season, other than Montrezl Harrell leaving, who was their sixth man. and replacing him with somebody who I think will benefit the team a lot more than Montrez and Serge Ibaka. And one key factor to that is floor spacing. You have players such as Kawhi Leonard, Lou Williams, and Paul George, who are good ISO players, but they had Montrez and they had Zubac in the paint, most likely. So with Ibaka, who can do good pick and rolls, who can block, who can, stay in the corner and hit the three, I think he'll benefit better than what Montrez did to the Clippers.
Yeah, I think I like their team as constructed right now more than last year. Plus, I think a big part for their success will definitely be Tyronn Lue. I think he's one of the best coaches to make in-game adjustments, and I think he's one of the best coaches to handle egos. So I'm really hoping Tyronn Lue turns his team around. I think the starting lineup will most likely look like Patrick Beverley, Luke Kennard at shooting guard, Kawhi, Paul George, and Ivica Zubac. And then you have a solid bench rotation of Reggie Jackson. You got Lou Williams. You got Marcus Morris, who they retained, who I think was big for them last year. And they have Serge Ibaka and Patrick Patterson as well. So that team is also stacked, really deep team. I think they're going to come out of the West next year. I think next year is their year. If everything goes right and nobody gets injured, I think this is their year.
I just hope the Clippers will do well because I want to see what happens when it's Kawhi versus LeBron in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's what everybody wanted to see, but
it's going
unfortunate.
To be a huge test to LeBron, at least. And speaking of LeBron, we have the Lakers, who are the champions of last season. I thought they wouldn't make much changes for next season, and oh boy, how wrong was I. They got rid of Rondo, replaced him with Dennis Schroeder, 6th Man of the Year candidate, who I had 6th Man of the Year winning last season. They got rid of JaVale McGee, but they got 6th Man of the Year Montrezl Harrell back, and now I think they are the champions as well for next season. And knowing that Caruso, he has been on the hot seat a little bit with the Lakers, I think he'll accept his role as a solid role player for them. He'll take, I think, a little bit of a step down as well, with Trez and Schroeder taking the shots with the bench unit. But damn, I gotta say, I think they're gonna be a heavy favorite for next season, and I think this offseason solidifies that.
I think it's odd for championship teams to get better in the offseason, but I think the Lakers have done that. And I think a player you didn't mention was Marc Gasol, who's going to most likely be their starting center. He's not necessarily as agile as before, but he's definitely a really good defensive center, and he can stretch the floor, so that's really good for the Lakers. As well as Wesley Matthews, who's most likely going to start at shooting guard. A really good defender, can hit the three, basically like Danny Green, only you pay him 10 times less money, which is perfect.
I'm wondering though, do you think Gasol will do a lot, knowing that he didn't perform well during the playoffs and he had a significantly decreased role with the Raptors compared to when he won the championship the season before?
Yeah, I think what the Lakers do very well is they have a lot of length. They like playing Anthony Davis at power forward, so I think Marc Gasol will benefit from that. As we saw JaVale McGee starting at center for most of the season, and he played pretty well. So I think Marc Gasol will get the same treatment. As we know, he's kind of washed up, but I'm hoping he has still one more year left in him, and he can, provide some decent value for this Los Angeles Lakers team next year.
Yeah, okay. All right. The Grizzlies, they were a really big surprise last season. They acquired John Morant with the 2nd pick, and they also acquired Brandon Clark with the 21st pick. Brandon Clark ended up becoming a solid asset off the get-go for the Grizzlies. And he was the player that surprised me the most out of everybody. They acquired? They acquired Mario Hezonja by trade. They didn't do much in the draft either, nor did they sign anybody significant. Their lineup will mostly be the same. However, I do not see them reaching the playoffs next season, even if they're in the play-in game.
Yeah, I like their lineup. I like Justice Winslow, but I don't think he's going to be starting the season. I think he's still injured. Same with Jaren Jackson, which is really unfortunate because those two guys I think, could be the future for Memphis. But they still have a really good team. They have Ja, they have Dylan Brooks, Jonas Valanciunas, and they're probably going to start Kyle Anderson and Brandon Clark if those two guys are injured. And they drafted Desmond Bain with the 30th pick, who I think is really good value for the 30th pick. Being able to shoot, he's one of the best shooters in the draft, close with Aaron Nesmith, who the Celtics drafted. They retained DeAnthony Melton, who was a beast in advanced stats, really good defender, really like him for Memphis. I think they're just going to build off what they had last year. I think they could get in the play-in tournament again, but necessarily I don't think they will get in the playoffs just yet. But I definitely think it's going to be a fun team to watch with Ja Morant leading the way.
Alright, next up we have the Miami Heat. I think they made an underrated draft choice, drafting Precious Achiuwa with the 20th pick. I thought he was going to fall around the 16 to 18 range, around that mark. He is described as Bam Adebayo 2.0, only that he can shoot threes. And knowing how Bam Adebayo did, that's just an insane comparison with an insane upside. And knowing that he will probably have a bench role, he won't have that much pressure going into the league, which will just benefit him even more. Although their offseason wasn't perfect, I really wish they kept Derrick Jones Jr. and Jay Crowder, because they did insanely well for the roles they did. I gotta commend them as well for signing Avery Bradley and Mo Harkless, who are good enough replacements for them. Although I do not believe they will have the same playoff success next season compared to last season, because of how the Eastern Conference has improved significantly this season compared to last season, with Kevin Durant coming back, Drew Holiday coming to Milwaukee, Boston is improving, Toronto made a few improvements as well. There are a few teams I would have ahead of Miami. However, knowing how people were underestimating Miami last season, I wouldn't be surprised if they had a great playoff run next season. It's just that it will be tougher because of how the East has been such a improved, conference next season.
Yeah, I think Jay Crowder, that loss really stinks for them. But getting Mo Harkless in return and Avery Bradley, who I think is perfect for the system they have in Miami, are pretty decent replacements for the money they had. And signing Bam Adebayo on an extension probably means they're not hunting for Giannis anymore, meaning that they can choose to trade for some players who have a little bit bigger contract and more years. And I think a player like Derrick Rose maybe, or a player like Blake Griffin could maybe help the Miami Heat if they do decide to go a little bit more all in. But I would definitely not give up Tyler Hero or Duncan Robinson, because they've been great players, and I think they'll definitely build off what they had last year, and they're going to be probably a top 4, top 5 team. I don't think they're really as good in the regular season, but when it is time for the playoffs, I think they'll be ready.
Yeah, another component I'm really happy they made was Goran Dragic. They signed him back for another 2 years. And another player who has potential to break out for Miami next season and emerge himself into the 6th man of the year conversation is Goran Dragic. Last year in the playoffs, I remember specifically he was torching Daniel Tice on the pick and roll, whether it be throwing a lob to Bam or just driving past him like he wasn't even there. He was more than crucial for Miami. He was starting for Miami in the playoffs, and he was nothing short of incredible for them. So I think he'll be a huge X factor for Miami coming to next season.
Yeah, all I want to say is I just want to see how Miami turns out next year. If they can prove to everybody that last year wasn't a fluke, and they can get back to at least the Eastern Conference Finals next year. I think that would, for me, I would still be surprised if they did that, because just looking at the paper for what they have, I still think Milwaukee and Brooklyn are teams that are better than them, but I really want to see them prove me wrong.
Next up, there is the Milwaukee Bucks, who have been a little bit disappointing in the playoffs these last 2 seasons. However, I think now is the best chance to prove that they can change that. By who they acquired by trade is Drew Holiday. They gave away Eric Bledsoe, George Hill, and 3 picks for Drew Holiday. And personally, I really like the move. He's always been known as an underrated player. He's a guard who can defend positions 1 through 4, and he's even had NBA players vouch for him on why he should be Defensive Player of the Year, why he should be the best guard, and why he's the best defensive guard in the league. And I like that signing because it gives Milwaukee what they've been desperately needing, which is both a third star, playmaking, and also valuable shot creating, and somebody who can really defend in an elite level, other 2 guards and 1 guards and 3 guards. Because George Hill, he wasn't doing the best job with what I saw. And it looked like that other than, Giannis and Middleton, they just weren't really there. They just didn't really care that much. So I think Jrue Holiday will provide, that extra motivation that the Milwaukee Bucks will need next season.
Yeah, I like Jrue Holiday. I do think it's a little bit an overpay. But if you think of the fact that you pay that money and the picks to get Jrue Holiday and keep Giannis, I think it's worth. But as seen from the reports recently, Giannis isn't content to sign the extension just yet. He's focusing on himself. So could that mean he's on his way out if they don't win? Is this a must-win year for them? This is definitely a crucial year for Milwaukee to finally get over the hump and get to the to the finals and even win the finals. I think they can do it with the team they have. It's just about can they adjust to other teams, because we've seen them struggle against Miami, we see them struggle against Toronto the previous year as well. So can Mike Budenholzer finally find a way to play Giannis more than 35 minutes and to find a way making other players successful even when Giannis is off the floor. So I really hope Milwaukee show that they're finally capable of going to the finals. I still think that team is really good. Maybe not as deep, but they still have players like Bobby Portis, who they signed, Torrey Craig, Bryn Forbes, DJ Augustine. Solid veteran players who aren't maybe as good as the ones they had before, but there's somebody who can get the job done while Giannis is off the floor. I think Milwaukee's going to be back, and I think they're going to be a really good team next year.
Yep. Next, the Minnesota Timberwolves. They made a couple moves. They had most notably the first overall pick, which they used to draft Anthony Edwards. However, there was a lot of speculation whether they're going to play him, whether they're going to trade him for somebody else. However, no trade moves necessarily happened. They acquired Ed Davis, who will be a solid enough backup, and they got Ricky Rubio back from Phoenix, who will probably slide into that backup position behind D'Angelo Russell. They, other than a few free agent signings they did with Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, I do not see Minnesota doing much. Their defense is not good, as Karl-Anthony Towns is an awful defender in the center position, and D'Lo is not really that big of a defender either. So other than just acquiring young assets and probably getting a few picks, I think Minnesota did what they had to do necessarily.
What I see from them right now is that they have a lot of guards. They have Anthony Edwards, Jarrett Culver, Malik Beasley. All of them can technically start. And if you look at the power forward spot, they literally have practically nobody. They have Juan Hernan Gomez, who's probably their best power forward right now. So I'm excited to see how the lineup will look at the start of the season. Do you start Ricky Rubio at point guard, move D'Angelo to shooting guard, and then you have to decide what to do with the small forward, power forward spots? Do you keep Ricky Rubio on the bench? These are all valuable questions to ask. I think this team is really guard heavy and not enough forwards really. So, I mean, I don't really see Minnesota doing much. I really hope Anthony Edwards turns out to be the star he was in college, that he improves on his defense. It's just a lot of unknowns for Minnesota right now for me to comment on anything.
The Pelicans, they made a few moves. They most notably traded away Jrue Holiday to get picks and a few other assets. They acquired Steven Adams from the Thunder. I never thought I would see the day where Adams left OKC. I thought he was going to be there for mostly in his entire career. But I guess that's not the case. He's now in the Pelicans uniform. I see him most likely starting over Jackson Hayes. However, a big concern I have is the three-point shooting. They also got Eric Bledsoe, who's an okay shooter, but he's not really all of that. With the three-point shooting as well, which benefits them during this offseason, is that they still have J.J. Redick at least. But other than that, they're going to be a struggling three-point team next season. They have Lonzo Ball, who I think will improve a lot more. Next season, he showed great flashes of a new three-pointer last season, and he played really well during a certain stretch of games. We saw Brandon Ingram become an all-star, which is exactly what they needed. They have somebody they can build around, and they also have Zion Williamson, who took the league by storm once he showed up, dropping 17 points in a row in his debut. So we could potentially see a huge 1-2 punch with Zion and Brandon Ingram, but also Lonzo Ball becoming a very solid key contributor to a team that could make some noise in a few years.
Yeah, I like the Steven Adams move because I think Derek Favors was okay for them. So I think Steven Adams is kind of a similar player. Doesn't really shoot, but can get rebounds. He's pretty strong. He's good at the pick and roll, so I like that. Plus, he only has 1 or 2 years on his contract, I believe. So it's okay because if he leaves, you're not really worried about that. You kind of got him for pennies anyway, so that's fine. Jackson Hayes still has time to develop off the bench. Yeah, obviously you have Zion, you have Ingram coming back. Shooting guard spot, who's going to start at shooting guard? Do you believe it's going to be Eric Bledsoe? Do you believe it's going to be J.J. Redick? What do you believe?
I think they will most likely run Eric Bledsoe. However, I believe it should be J.J. Redick, knowing that there is little to no floor spacing with having Eric Bledsoe there instead. Plus, Eric Bledsoe is a ball-dominant guard. Lonzo is a ball-dominant guard. Brandon Ingram needs the ball in his hands. Zion Williamson can move off the ball, I think, kind of decently. However, they're going to have too many ISO-centric players, and I think having J.J. Redick starting will cause a little bit more flow in the offense. He can run off pin downs, he can run off the ball really nicely. However, I think they'll probably start Bledsoe. However, I think, as I said, J.J. Redick should take the starting spot.
I agree with your point. I think J.J. Redick should start. They also have Kyra Lewis Jr. as a point guard, so if they want to get him some kind of minutes, they would obviously need to have Eric Bledsoe as a shooting guard so Kyra gets the backup spot. But that is yet to be seen. Their team is kind of deep. They have a lot of big men as well, I guess. Nicolo Melli, Willie Hernan Gomez, who they signed. Nickel Alexander-Walker coming back for a second year. They have Josh Hart as a backup for Brandon Ingram. So yeah, that team is also going to be pretty nice to watch. And now, full season for Zion, no minutes restrictions. They could take, as you said, they could take league by storm, and not even in a couple of years. They could even do it next year. I like the team they have, and I think there's very much room for growth, but they're still really good now already.
Yeah, agree on that one. Next up, we have the New York Knicks. Now, they didn't do much, and I was very confused with their offseason moves, like how I was confused with the Pistons. The only bright side I see is that they drafted Obi Toppin. Other than that, I'm really confused. I mean, yes, they got Omari Spellman and Jacob Evans III, who won't do much. However, there are moves that they must make, cheap moves for probably players who won't do much. However, what I noticed was that they had Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. I have no idea why they would choose Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. And what they did was, if I remember correctly, they waived Elfrid Payton, then re-signed him again. And I'm just really confused because they know they're not going to win anyway. Why not play the likes of Frank Ntilikina or Dennis Smith Jr.? And although they haven't done much, they're young and they can maybe increase their trade value if they play well. However, if the Knicks don't do that, they'll just be constantly in mediocrity. So what do you think the Knicks should do moving forward?
I think it's mainly just draft. I don't think many players want to come to play with New York as we've seen for the past couple of free agencies. So they didn't really make any big moves. They signed players to 1 or 2 year deals like Alec Burks, Austin Rivers. They also got Nerlens Noel. But I think it's a good backup. I think getting Obi Toppin, him playing for his hometown, I think that's going to be huge for him as well as for New York Knicks fans. Hopefully they can fall in love with him. Hopefully they can get Julius Randle out of there because he is not good for the New York Knicks. But overall, it's just another season for New York in being at the depths. They're not going to do much. But yeah, just looking forward to the future. Nothing much for the Knicks.
Yeah. Next up, we have OKC. They
King of the fourth quarter, you take assets and you flip them, basically.
The OKC Thunder, they were notoriously known this offseason for just generating so many first-round picks, and they're hitting the hard reset button. They'll most likely have picks for the next 5 years that'll be in the first round. And there are many benefits that comes with that. Not only will they, they'll rebuild, they can build around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and they have other players to do that with. They have all these picks they can use. They can draft a good player. Also, when the time comes, they may use those picks to get a superstar. And they have enough for 2 of them. Definitely. So in the few years, I wouldn't be surprised if the Thunder would be a top 5 seed if they keep Shai and if they keep Lorenz Dort, who's a solid role player. They acquired Trevor Ariza. That's a solid deal. They also acquired Al Horford from Philadelphia, who I think will do better in OKC compared to Philly because he will have a lot more room to work with. They also got George Hill, and they also have Justin Jackson from Dallas. Other than that, there isn't much they necessarily did. I like Darius Baisley, I like Shai, I like Mike Muscala as well, who is a okay stretch center, somewhat of today's, center, which you need is shooting. But do you think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander will still produce those solid numbers compared to last season, knowing that Chris Paul isn't there anymore?
Will he? No, he will produce more than that. He's gonna have the ball in his hands almost most of the time because there's literally nobody else who can create his own shot. If you look at the team, it's just a bunch of role players, and then you have Al Horford. I think what they're probably going to try to do is improve their young guys. I think Darius Baisley is going to have a good year. I really liked him in the bubble. Al Horford, I think they're going to try to get him as a positive value player, so they get picks for him, same as they did with Chris Paul. So I think he's going to be playing center, and he's going to be getting a lot of minutes. They drafted a bunch of players, including Aleksej Pokusevski, who's a really talented big man, but he's really thin and he needs some work on the G League most likely. But yeah, Oklahoma, they hit the hard reset button as you said, and we're just gonna have to wait and see if there's any player from the roster that they have that maybe pans out other than Shai, and then they can decide on their future. But for right now, it's just a hard rebuild. Don't see them doing much next year and just waiting for the draft, really.
Yeah, another question with Shai is, do you think he can make the All-Star game despite the Thunder not being a high seed?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think, well, the Western Conference is kind of stacked with guards, but I think if Shai takes another step, like he did from the first season to the second season, I can see him being in the All-Star game.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. With Shai, I'm not 100% sure yet because we saw an example of Bradley Beal averaging 30 points, not reaching the All-Star game. So I'm not 100% sure yet. However, I do think it could be possible.
But I do think Bradley Beal should have made the All-Star game. That was crazy that he didn't make it after the season that he had.
Yeah, because when you look at the numbers, although Trae Young averaged a lot of assists, a lot of points as well, his team was lower than Washington's, if I'm correct, and Bradley Beal was top 5 in scoring, averaging 30.
He's the first player having 30 points who wasn't named an All-Star. So that's a fact for you.
Damn. Did not know. Damn. It's crazy to think that a player of Bradley Beal's caliber, with the stat line that he has, does not make the All-Star team.
Yeah.
For next up, we have the Orlando Magic, who I believe they should just tank, hit the hard reset button, get rid of Vucevic, get rid of Fournier, just reset everything and go back into mediocrity, because their team has been in the same position for the last 3 or 4 years, and that position is the worst position any team can be in, because they're not getting better, they're not getting worse, and they're not necessarily doing anything other than fringe playoff position and nothing else. They drafted Cole Anthony with the 15th pick. I don't know what that will mean with Markelle Fultz. Maybe they'll do a 2-man lineup with him and Markelle, or maybe Cole Anthony will come off the bench, becoming a 6-man for Markelle Fultz, or vice versa. I have no idea what they'll do either. They kept Al-Farouq Aminu, which is okay, I guess. They kept Mo Bamba, who I'm still waiting to do stuff. They also kept Aaron Gordon, who's been in a lot of trade rumors, who I think should leave for maybe a new situation. But with Orlando, there isn't much to talk about here.
Yep. Yeah, hit a hard reset. Jonathan Isaac is out for the year as well, so nothing really much you can do, as he's one of the key players for that team. Just, I guess, improve the young guys, improve Markelle, Cole Anthony. You have Chuma Okeke coming in, who was a good player in college, but he was injured all first year. So hopefully he gets some good running time. Other than that, I think they should try to look for other ways they can make the team better. Maybe it's like getting worse at the start, but then looking at the future, they'll get better. But right now, yeah, as you said, being the 8th spot, they don't really get much free agents. They get bounced off the first round every single year, and they get a mediocre pick, and they don't really get much better with like a number 15 player in the draft.
Yeah, that's tough. Next up with Philly, I'm really happy with the moves they made, to be honest with you. They're not that big compared to some other teams. However, they made good enough visible and viable improvements. They got Seth Curry, who benefits them a lot more compared to Josh Richardson, knowing that Seth Curry can create a shot really nicely, and he's somewhat of a volume scorer as well. Plus, I think he was, if I'm correct, all-time leader in 3-point percentage.
Seth Curry?
Yeah.
Damn.
I think so, yeah. He overtook Steph last season. They got Danny Green, who will help with the 3-and-D role. He can somewhat replace what Josh Richardson did. Plus, they have Terrence Ferguson, who is an athletic player who will be a very nice spark plug off the bench. He was decent for what he produced in OKC. But other than that, there isn't much he'll do. They signed Justin Anderson from Brooklyn, and they signed Dwight Howard from the Lakers. Dwight Howard will play the backup role behind Embiid. It's kind of in the same role as Terrence Ferguson. Do your role, provide a spark, get the team going as well. With that in mind, where do you see Philly? Where do you see Philly in the playoffs next season?
Yeah, this is gonna be interesting. Obviously, they have a new coach, they have new GM as well. So they kind of went for a logical choice. Having Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, you definitely need shooting. So they went with Danny Green, Seth Curry. Where did I see him in the playoffs? I think 4 or 5 seed is where I see him right now. I think they're better than Indiana and Atlanta, but are they better than Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Toronto, and Boston? I don't really think so. So they're kind of in the middle right now. But I definitely like to be wrong. I'd like to see what Doc Rivers can do with Ben and Joel, and if they can make a different kind of game style so they can both flourish. So, yeah.
The Phoenix Suns are the next team, and I'm going to be honest, they are one of my favorite teams that made a great offseason. After watching the Phoenix team in the bubble, I'm like, damn, I really want to see what they're going to do next year. Because Devin Booker next season has potential to elevate himself into superstardom. Where they are guys who could potentially carry their teams and will their teams in the playoffs. Give him a few more years, definitely. But I think we'll start to see a hint of that to come next season. And with the offseason they made, it's definitely possible and viable. They got Chris Paul, who will be there for a short stint. However, the learning that he will give Devin Booker and the experience he'll give Devin Booker will be second to none. knowing what Chris Paul provided with the Thunder last season. Another underrated signing they made was definitely Jay Crowder. After being solid in the bubble, I guess he decided to go to Phoenix, and with that in mind, they'll definitely reach the play-in tournament. They could definitely reach the playoffs, and although they may not reach the playoffs, let's say, bear in mind injuries may happen, I think for short term and long term, this will be great for Phoenix. Because when you see Chris Paul in the Phoenix uniform, he tends to make centers absolutely amazing. For example, when you look at Tyson Chandler when he was in New Orleans and DeAndre Jordan in the Clippers, DeAndre Jordan was an all-NBA center. And DeAndre Ayton, in my opinion, has more offensive skill than those two. So I could see DeAndre Ayton producing an amazing season with Chris Paul being the point guard.
Yeah, that's a good point. I definitely agree with that. And I think if they continue to play like they played in the bubble, for sure, I can see this team being in the playoffs even more than Houston and Golden State. This team is absolutely stacked. Every position, off the bench, you would have Dario Saric, you'd have Cameron Johnson, and even a player like Etwan Moore, who you don't think provides much, but he's a great sharpshooter, as well as Javon Carter, Cameron Payne. You just have a lot of players who can produce value for this team, and I think obviously the main players are Chris Paul, Booker, and DeAndre Ayton, but like the role players they have, and I think the resurgence of Chris Paul, I really like what Phoenix has done, and I think they are if we had to rank all the teams, I think I'd give Phoenix like the best rating for like how they did in the offseason.
Yeah, I think they're definitely top 3, at least. It depends who you ask. And another top 3 underrated offseason are the Trailblazers. I really love the Robert Covington trade, and I like the Enes Kanter trade. It's based on stuff they needed to improve, knowing that Hassan Whiteside left. And they also acquired Robert Covington, who is a player who can fit into any team. And I'm saying any team. And it'll help them improve. I like that they're keeping Carmelo as well. Their Rodney Hood will be back as well after an injury. Zach Collins, he's a decent role player who knows what to do as well. However, two signings I should mention. They have our low-risk, high-reward, our Derrick Jones Jr. with the contract that they gave him, and Harry Giles III, who I remembered was projected to be a lottery pick, an insane top 10 pick. However, he was injured, so he dropped. I really believe a change in scenery could help Harry Giles. However, because of everybody else in front of him, Zach Collins, Nurkic,
Kanter. Kanter.
Yeah, Enes Kanter as well. 3 guys who you could argue should have more minutes than him. However, if they have injuries, I believe Harry Giles could step up and provide well-needed minutes and stats for the Trailblazers.
Yeah, I really love the Trailblazers offseason. Covington, I think it's a perfect fit for them. Carmelo coming back. He played great for Portland, so it's nice to see him come back. Nurkic was great, and Enes Kanter played great when he was in Portland, so I think it was a no-brainer to get him back. Harry Giles, he's basically a roster filler, but obviously having a young player who can develop is nice to have in there. You have Derrick Jones Jr., who is going to be a nice player off the bench for them. Rodney Hood, who helped them tremendously in the playoffs against Denver. And Gary Trent, who was amazing in the bubble, and I'm hoping he can continue off of that hot streak that he had, continuing to be like a good player and even a sixth-man candidate for next year.
Definitely. I heard there are rumors that Portland will make an amazing run next season. Do you think, knowing that Damian Lillard still has prime years left, and they made those solid, off-season moves, do you think they have a finals run in them?
Finals run, no, because I don't really see them going past teams like Lakers, Clippers, or Denver. But I can see them going to the semifinals and giving a hard 5, 6, or even 7-game series to any team. Because this team, it has everything. Now it even has defending. And with players like Lillard and McCollum, you definitely need defending because they're not the best defenders. But having Covington there, having Nurkic, who's a decent defender, I like what they did, and I think they can definitely go far in the playoffs.
Agreed. Next up, we have the Sacramento Kings. I'm a little bit yes and a little bit no with what they did. However, it's more on the yes side. Like, this is a good thing they did. I like the Tyrese Halliburton pick. No idea why he moved down all the way to 12. I had him going top 8 at least. Other than that, the Bogdanovich left, of course. So what they did was they acquired Halliburton to replace that. However, they also acquired Hassan Whiteside and Glenn Robinson III to help with the rotational minutes as well. However, with Tyrese Halliburton, what do you see happening for Buddy Hield?
Well, as we saw last season, they had Buddy Hield off the bench. I don't know why they did that. I don't know why Luke Walton does that. But if this continues, I could see Tyrese Halliburton being the future two guard for Sacramento, because he fits the same age as De'Aaron Fox. Buddy Hield, as we know, is 27. You would think that he's young, but he's reaching his prime right now. I think he's a perfect candidate to trade. I think you get some value back for him, but I don't really see Sacramento going back to the playoffs anytime soon with the lineup they have right now. I thought the year they had, what was it, 2 years ago now, or was it last year when they were almost in the playoffs?
That was 2 years ago, I believe.
Yeah, because that team was really nice to watch, and then obviously we get on the hype train for 1 year, and then next year they become this. They fired their coach for no reason after the season they had. They have Luke Walton, and they have another mediocre season. And another thing I don't get is, why did you just front load on all of these centers? You have Marvin Bagley, you have Bielitsa, you have Rashawn Holmes, Whiteside, Frank Kaminsky. Even Jabari Parker can play power forward, as well as Harrison Barnes. Where is your minutes going to come from? I don't understand this move from Sacramento, but you just front loaded in all of these centers, and it's going to be sad because all of them deserve minutes, but there's so many good centers, similar to Dallas. So I don't know. I'm disappointed with how they did in the offseason. But for the draft, I think they were obvious winners in the draft because it was an obvious choice to take Tyrese Halliburton, who kind of slipped a little bit. But if you look at the free agency, I don't know, man. I didn't really like it.
Nah, me neither, at least. The Spurs, they picked Devin Vassell 11th. I don't know yet about that pick. However, I saw a little bit of Vassell in college, and I think he'd benefit the Spurs system a lot, knowing how he's a capable ball movement player and he can score in a variety of ways. Plus, I think he's an okay defender as well. They were, in my opinion, a little bit of the same situation with the Orlando Magic. They're good, but they're not great, and they're not necessarily going to do much either. Marco Bellinelli is leaving, Bryn Forbes is leaving. Those are two players that haven't done much necessarily. However, that will probably summarize the Spurs this offseason. As they're not doing much, they're going to keep it as it is and probably try and find out what they can do for next season as well.
I remember I read an interview with Greg Popovich, and he said something like, "Oh well, did we get in the playoffs and did we win enough games?" So he's basically hinting at that there's going to be some changes made. I don't know if it's going more younger and that he's planning to trade either DeRozan or LaMarcus, but there's definitely going to be some changes made. I would like to see some more stuff from Lonnie Walker, as I think he can be a really good player in the league. Keldon Johnson, as we've talked about off the podcast, really good player. He played decently in the bubble. What did he average, 13 points in the bubble?
I think it was around that, but he had I think he had a 20-point game here and there.
Yeah, so, good player who can play. Devin Vassell, known role, 3-and-D. Young guy, he can fit in the team as well. So, as you said, not really much they did, but I'm hoping that they decide on the direction they want to go. And if it was me, I'd obviously look to trade either DeMar or LaMarcus or both, and let the young guys just roll with it.
Yeah, definitely agree on that because, if they choose to do that, I'd say, their offseason was a success based on what they had to do. Because with the way DeRozan and Aldridge are playing, they're not necessarily molded into today's league. That's why I think they should necessarily leave and maybe see if they can fit elsewhere. Next up, we have the Toronto Raptors. They didn't do much. They acquired DeAndre Bembry from Atlanta, Alex Len from Sacramento, Aaron Baines from Phoenix. Those are somewhat small moves, however, moves that will, fill the void decently enough. Marcus Gasol left, they got Aaron Baines. They got Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, who left, they got DeAndre Bembry from Atlanta. They didn't make big moves, however. They did enough to make them stay afloat in the playoffs, be a little bit dangerous here and there. They got Fred VanVleet back, which is a huge plus, because he's going to be their point guard for the future, knowing that Kyle Lowry is getting up there in age, even though Kyle Lowry was a menace for Boston in the playoffs.
For Toronto against Boston.
Yeah, for Toronto against Boston, Kyle Lowry was creating problems, and he was becoming irritant to me as, man, he's really good at selling fouls, I gotta say. However, I respect the game, and he's really good in the playoffs. But what I think Toronto should do is that they should make Pascal Siakam shoot a lot more from the perimeter, because in the playoffs, he was not good at all. He was doing mostly the same thing again and again, spinning in the paint, somewhat like what Giannis did. And when you see how that happened, that got them bounced out of the playoffs. But Toronto should try and experiment with Pascal Siakam shooting more from the perimeter. Not only how that'll benefit spacing, it'll benefit, their playoff chances as well.
Yeah, I mean, Toronto, they did what they had to do. They got Fred VanVleet back. Sad that they didn't get Serge, so they had to replace him with Aaron Baines, who I think is a really good player for the money they got. Chris Boucher can now get some running time, who is actually, he's like 28 now. You'd think that he's young, but he's actually going into his prime. Not much that they made. They signed some complementary role players, so I don't know. I think their window for winning a championship is really closed, but they're definitely a team in the 4-5 range. I'd love to see a first round. Obviously, we're thinking now like almost half a year ahead, but I'd love to see a first round of Philadelphia versus Toronto. I think that'd be pretty fun. But yeah, I think Toronto, they're going to be in the playoffs. Are they as good as last year? Probably not, but they're still definitely a fun team to watch if Kyle Lowry stays in the same shape as last year.
Yeah. The Utah Jazz, I'm really surprised with how they were 3-1 up in the playoffs last year. Donovan Mitchell immersed himself as a playoff performer along with Jamal Murray. It helped them get more in the mainstream media. Not that they already weren't in the mainstream media. They proved that they can get it done in the playoffs, which for me is a huge plus moving forward for your career. Knowing how we see Paul George, for example, in this light, he was an excellent regular season performer. He has all these expectations coming into the playoffs. However, in the playoffs, he's never gotten it done, and that's what he will at times be known for, kind of like a shadow of his former self. So with Utah, I say they should keep moving forward with Mitchell. With Gobert, they should not sign him for the Supermax, knowing how limited he is offensively and at times defensively on the perimeter. But I like the moves they made. They got Derek Favors back, who I think is a solid pick. They also got a few rookies such as Udoka Azubuike and Elijah Hughes. They won't probably do much, however, with the position Utah's in, I say play a few young players here and there as well. See how they do. Bojan Bogdanovic is staying after being injured. He had a great year. He was better than Mike Conley, and Mike Conley wasn't even that impressive last season. However, I think you can blame that to change of system and a change of role. But with the moves they made, such as Derek Favors, where do you see Utah? Because I think there's somewhat of a kind of like a stalemate, like they're staying the way they are.
Actually, I think they should run it back, as you said, because they almost beat Denver, who were in the conference finals without Bojan Bogdanovic. So I think they should try it again. Mike Conley 1 year under his belt, so he'll maybe be improved. Derek Favors, obviously, returning because he played so well for Utah when he was there in the start. So that's nice. They have a solid bench players with Jordan Clarkson, Royce O'Neal, George Niang, and as I said, Derek Favors. So you could see a 9-man rotation, but they do have a lot of young players. So I don't know. If somebody gets injured, they're kind of going to be depleted with their roster, or they're going to have to give chances to young people. But other than that, I think they should just run it back and see how far they can go. But as you said, Rudy Gobert, that's going to be a big question once the time comes for his extension. But if I'm Utah right now, I just try to run it back, see what happens, and look from there.
Yeah. Lastly but not least, we have the Washington Wizards. Later in the offseason, they decided to make a splash and trade for Russell Westbrook after John Wall said, hey, I do not want to be here anymore. So they got rid of John Wall and a pick for Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook has been going from team to team a little bit recently. However, it is clear that he wasn't the best fit with James Harden, as they're both guards who need the ball in their hands to produce. I really like the draft pick they made with Danny Avdija, although his role will be maybe a little bit decreased than usual because of signing because of trading for Russell Westbrook. My bad. Danny Avdija, he somewhat will be a part of the wave that many NBA teams will go for. The European guy who can do somewhat of everything, have a lot of finesse in his game, such as what Dallas did with Doncic. I think starting with Doncic, teams are going to be starting to look at the wave of European players who will be having solid all-around games with the winning mentality, because when you look at European basketball compared to NBA basketball, there is a lot of stuff with fouls. Team defense is a huge part, and ball movement is a lot more of a factor compared to NBA. And with that, you get a lot of perks, such as leadership, ball movement, versatility, which is something Danny Avdija can help with Washington. At least with the playoffs, I have no idea how they'll fit. Maybe they'll fit in the 8th seed, maybe 9th seed, get in the play-in tournament. But I think they're going to be a fun team to watch next season, with Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal having great individual seasons. But as a team, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, this is a huge unknown for me as well. They do definitely have a nice group of players, as you mentioned, Westbrook, Beal. They have Troy Brown Jr., Rui Hachimura, Thomas Bryant. Then off the bench, I guess technically you could have Davis Bertans. You have a player like Danny Avdija, and I think they have basically baby versions of Kawhi and Luka. Kawhi being Rui and Luka being Danny Avdija. Will they pan out as being these players? Most likely not. But hey, you can always dream. And these players, still young, European players. Well, not technically European. They're both from Asia. But international players. They have a lot of potential. Same with Atlanta. They have a lot of potential now and in the future. And I'm going to be excited to watch Washington play. Hopefully Russell Westbrook has a better year than he had last year. And, good for him playing with his former coach in Scott Brooks. That's what I have to say.
Definitely. So that is all 30 teams. We have said at least our opinion on what every team made. Only time will tell. We'll see how the season will progress. I think next season will be a great season. Knowing how it starts earlier, there will be expect a lot more offense. That's all I have to say for that, at least, because less crowd, it'll feel more of like a scrimmage game than anything.
Also a lot of unknowns with, all the COVIDs and everything. Any player could get COVID since we're not in a bubble anymore. So it could get really hectic, but hopefully nothing gets shut down and everything goes smoothly. So, yeah, I'm hoping for that.
All right, see ya.
Bye-bye.